So could you explain to us what epigenetic is? I understand the word epi means on or above in Greek, and genetics means the genome. So that's a very technical word. So could you explain to us how really what this exact means?
Wow, now that's a deep dive, but I love the question. So, if we look at, like you said, epi, meaning above or outside of something, and then we look at gene as the genetic expression of who we are, say that's the blueprint of this body, of this self. And so if we see epi outside of and blueprint, we now understand that epigenetics is a phenomenon of influence outside of the blueprint of us. So in other words, if we could adjust a specific blueprint, let's say we're building a house and we have these great plans, and midway we go, oh my gosh, I know, you know what, I want that room over there. And so we, outside of the blueprint, make adjustments in mid-flight, essentially, in mid-build, I guess you might say. And so the epiphenomenon is our ability to influence the blueprint of us in real time, in flight, I might say. Does that make sense? It's an evolutionary process that happens in each individual lifetime within each individual body. However, still carrying on ancestral content and such from our past and our family. So we'll kind of open that up a little bit in a minute.
Makes sense. So what you're saying is that if you change the external environment in a different circumstance, let's say living in the Northwest in the United States, moving to southern part of the US, that's a different climate, different environment, or going to even different countries. So that external environment that potentially influencing the genome, basically.
Like I said, this blueprint that we get, this blueprint is influenced by generations past. And so the code itself, the genetic code, is extremely vast and it's infinite in its potential. And what that means, it's ever changing. Now there's a percentage of that genetic code, only a small percentage, about 3% of that genetic code says it's going to be a muscle cell, a skin cell, a bone cell, a brain cell, whatever kind of cell that code is influencing or creating. But the 97% of that code, now remember, 97% of that code is adaptive, reading the environment. So 3% says it's going to be a skin cell based on history, our family, our grandparents, their grandparents, and so on, all the way back to the beginning of humanity. It's all built in that genome, in that code. But it can lay dormant. It can lay silent. It can lay aside if we don't influence it in the epi way, outside of that code, right, above and beyond. And so say that we have some ancestry in our family for a disease, a disorder, a condition, right? It can lay dormant in us unless we start expressing specific behaviors and patterns and conditions, environmental influences and participation with what created that experience in the past or in our family. So we bring that forward, which is a super powerful understanding when we start looking at our future and deciding kind of do we want our past to be forwarded into our future, and there's where beliefs, behaviors, conditioning from our environment starts to take a hold and play. Does that make sense? Exactly. So if we look at the way that, say, life comes together, the energy and information from the mother, energy and information from the father come together and combine into a baby, into a fetus, and the placement of this mother has influence, because the studies show that the fetus can hear and sense content around the outside environment. How many times people speak to the child within the mother's belly. And so can that baby hear, say, sirens and gunshots and or beautiful harmonic music or soft tones. And so going on during that development, the child or the fetus is being adapted to so that when it's born, it can survive. The entire purpose of the 97% of the adaptive gene is so that the host or the person, the being, can survive in its environment, no matter where the environment is. So you come out into an environment, whether it be in California or the Arctic, and the body is essentially prepared for that experience. And let me tell you another piece about environment is that to us, as our consciousness, the room or our house or our world or our state or our country, whatever, is your environment. But to the cell, it's the internal body. And so everything within the internal body is an energetic influence on that genetic code. So our thoughts, our feelings, our belief systems, our perceptions, our ego, personality, all of that is energetic influence. Again, epigenetic influence on the code.
And this one of the pioneer doctor, I think I heard that Dr. Bruce Lipton, he's the one kind of made that really shift in understanding of this gene, talking about the epigenetic. Could you tell us about how this Dr. Bruce Lipton came up to the idea of not genes not dictating you who you will be, who want to become, but the external environments are going to influence to who you will really become, right?
Yeah, and this is a great experiment. Back in the late 60s, Dr. Bruce Lipton was experimenting with stem cells and essentially putting them within what he called a culture medium, which is like a petri dish that had a solution in it which gave a specific protein influence on the cell. And so what he discovered was he took these cells, these adaptive cells, and he would put them in a petri dish. And even though the cells were mutated from the original cell, and so they would change based on the environment. So a skin cell would become, or I should say, a stem cell that was put into petri dish for a culture medium or an environmental influence of skin. That cell would become skin. Or a petri dish or culture medium that would invite the energy of muscle, that cell would become muscle. So forth with bone or even with brain. So what was discovered so within the stem cell was a potential, a biological potential, right? All it needed was an environmental influence to trigger the outcome. And then that cell, that stem cell, became that influence of its environment. Phenomenal content, right? I mean, yeah, this is the biggest influence on the gene code. So basically, it's not the gene that determines the expression; it's the environment that determines the expression.
I mean, that's absolutely amazing discovery of the our evolution-wise, because we're not gonna get stuck because I have this gene. For example, I get a migraine. My father had it, my grandfather had it, or my uncle. That's why I'm going to have the migraine headaches. Actually, that's not true based on the epigenetic, the study of epigenetic, correct?
It's correct. It's not true. So there are potentials within your genetic code because of the history of the family. And that's why, the medical conventional medicine asks you for your history, right? Because especially when they're investigating a disease of cancer or diabetes or something that is some of the more life-threatening conditions, or I should say even long-term conditions, they look for traits within the genetic code. And of course, I mean, it probably dates back somewhere and you could find that. However, it's the behavior pattern. So what happens is that we act a lot like our ancestors. We act a lot like our parents. We adopt behavior patterns, belief systems, ways of being from our parents, our teachers, our coaches, our mentors. And so based on those ways of being, then it starts to turn on genetic coding that's laying dormant, just waiting for the influence from the outside. When I say outside, I'm not necessarily meaning in your house or in your state, but I'm also meaning within your behavior patterns, your internal thought processes. Those all have a big influence. And in fact, the thought, the belief, the ego has probably the mother lode influence on the way in which the genetic code actually expresses.
I see. So it's not just the outside environment. It could be living in a certain climate, certain culture. On top of it, we have internal influence that can be major factors. As a matter of fact, I think many of the studies and research shows the third trimester when during a mother's womb, all the way up to age 7 or 8 years old, they're going to dictate the blueprints of this, how the children's gonna be for the future of how they're going to perceive or how they're going to believe in certain things. So that's what you're saying, that those influences are so significant that now we have this certain patterns that are going to dictate, who you become on top of the external environment. So in the context of that, what you're explaining, so if you change the internal environment, which that's going to help our epigenetic expression gonna be who you become. So basically who you are right now, who you want to be, that's what we have to shift. Belief and perception. Is that how you
Yeah, absolutely. So the part of that is there's many studies out there, and there's lots of practices out there. One of which Dr. Caroline Leaf has several books, by the way, which are very interesting and useful. One called Switch on Your Brain, another one that is talks about rewire your anxious brain. Some of those things, there are steps that we can take. And the first step, and what I always coach everyone around, is to build an awareness. What happens is the unconscious thought, the things that are going on behind the scenes, again, things that were expressed, or I should say even created at that adolescent, at that beginning stage of the child, are now running in the background as an adult. And we don't even realize it. We just think that that's just who we are, or how we are. It's so normal. It's so typical. It's just like, that's just the way I think. And I hear this all the time. Well, that's just how I am. That's not true. That's how you've become, what you've become comfortable with. And so being aware of these unconscious behaviors and patterns and beliefs are essentially the stepping stones to change. But when we're so ingrained with just being who we are, how do we even know what that is? And typically it's when we feel discomfort, when we feel suffering, when we feel something, like you said, a migraine. And this chronic migraine condition, if we lean towards the conventional model of medicine, they're going to go along the ways of chemistry, right? Of a protocol that's not really curing the causation, but masking the symptom. So when we look at causation, we have to look at emotional conditioning. We have to look at conditioning overall, and then find out how this gene is being expressed, because everybody has a potential for migraine, but not everybody gets them. So what's being turned on in terms of behaviors, beliefs, perceptions? Migraines, typically, pain from wherever they're stemming from. There are a lot of things that we may be suppressing, and energy that's being stuck and causing some of this stuff with us. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for explaining to us for that, because many times clinically, probably many physicians and practitioners and healers, they come across that type of cases. Often, their clients and patients express, in the sense that, wow, I have this massive cramping, during the menstruation in a woman, female patients. Well, my mother had it, my grandmother had it, that's what I'm going to have. They have a certain belief. But when we ask question, well, if you have a siblings, for example, you have the sister, right? Sometimes your sister have the same behavior, same problem. Sometimes client and patient says, well, my sister don't have the same problem, but I do, rest of the other family. So now here's a question of why this person, particular individual in the family, not expressing the genes, correct?
Let's even go a step further. Let's take identical twins, and let's take those identical twins at birth and separate them on different continents, and this has happened, and then come back and take a look at them in their 50s and 60s. And one identical twin that was in an environment of chaos, disorder, disruption, and fear versus the one that was in a condition of balance and opportunity and nurturing. One at the same age, it looks, the body, the genetic body and the physical mass of the body looks 10, 15 years older than the one that's in a condition or an environment that doesn't challenge or stimulate fear. So those are some of the things that are very, very interesting. These are exact genetic codes that are almost identical, right? And with the same parental influence, but changed environments. And the genes for some disorders and disruptions didn't manifest in one because of environment versus the other.
Explain that really captured our words that we always contemplate in quantum, right? The words of quantum physics, of quantum science. That the theory that came out in the early 1900s, that really gave us a really beautiful hope and expansion of a human expression, what we could be in the future. We could be potentially unlimited potentiality that we could express by tapping into the waveform, which is an unlimited potential. Continuation of the particle after particle, but now when you observe them, when you focus on it, you can really manifest the one aspect of you. That means if you don't like that, it's always possible you're going to manifest a different version of you by tapping into different information field.
And I want to make sure that the audience knows we as a consciousness is the most powerful influence over matter. This body is a biological matter, and it requires, and Einstein proved this theory, it requires consciousness, awareness to solidify anything into matter. And so there is a filtering mechanism. There is a perfect blueprint of who you are, of who we are within the information field. Again, within the infinite intelligence of this genetic coding. Each one of us has our own individual genetic coding system, but it only tracks back a few generations. And so that's why we look a certain way. This is why we have certain features, right? But the entire genetic coding goes all the way back to humanity. And Einstein proved this theory that by simply becoming aware, by simply observing a specific energetic influence, the waveform, it influences how that wave turns into particle or matter of the body itself. So we now have a tremendous influence over this material body by how we're observing everything within our external. That's a really important thing. I want to make sure empowering people is my way. Using the gifts you already have is my passion.
So that means breaking habits of a current version of you, and then to act based on the future vision of the future, exactly what you want. So you gotta act based on that.
100%. And so that's great knowledge. Now let's talk just a moment about how. What do you actually have to do to manifest change in your life? And I'm going to circle back to this number one thing. The biggest muscle that you should work out every day in your life is your awareness muscle. Being aware. And what do you need to be aware of? Again, be aware of the feelings, the emotions, the physical attributes of your body. Just be aware of them, not to suppress them, not to negate them, not to ignore them, but just to be aware. And take a look at basically what you like and don't like. You know, what things you feel are toxic or lowering your energetic vibration, right? Reflect on why you actually feel this. So step one, awareness, right? Just open your awareness. And it means that to observe what you normally haven't been observing. Think about what you think about. There's a little historical process going on in your brain all the time. And this is this little inner roommate. And if you don't think you have an inner roommate, just think about what's talking to you inside your head right now. That's the inner roommate. Think about that process. What dialogue is going on in your head? How are you rehearsing the content of your external world? So to be aware of what you're thinking about. Think about what you think about. Number one, that's your awareness muscle. Number two, reflect on these feelings and these ways of these things you're doing. Do they support you? Are they toxic? Are they useful? Right? Take a look at those. Number 2, just being aware and reflect on those things. Number 3, write them down. I highly believe writing things down, keeping a journal, is probably one of the most valuable tools, because the moment you write something down, or the moment you take a picture of something, it's now an archive in time. I have thousands and thousands of pictures because it's an archive in time that captures the moment. I write things down because now my brain won't edit that. If you just leave it inside your head, let's just say the picture you saw or the content you wanted to rehearse or write down, if you left it in your head, I promise you the next time you have an emotional eruption, it will edit the content to change it to fit that present moment emotion. So what you've written down can't be changed. It's an archive in time. So that's number 3, right? Number 4, go back and recheck what you've written. Look for patterns over time. Look for patterns. Do I always attract the same kind of partner that is emotionally removed and can't answer, to my needs? Or, do I always have a limited money blueprint? Am I struggling with money? Do I always live in an environment of chaos and disorder? Take a look at those patterns. Write them down. Now they're historical. Take a look at the patterns. Now you're creating an understanding of your patterns. And then last, remember, what you're writing down is also the attitude about it, the feelings about it, the emotions about it. You want to make sure you're complete so you can actually understand how that's being influenced. But lastly, number 5 is to take action. To actually be in your environment differently than what you have been. What that means is that if the actions and behaviors of your past don't belong in your future, you need to change what you're doing in the now, right now. And the most beneficial process for that is to be what your future self looks like. Dress, speak, interact with humans, other people, make friends. If you're not one that makes friends well, go out there and act as your future self. Act as this environmental influence that you want to turn on with this genetic code. And I promise you that by doing the action, by performing the behavior, the outside environment, remember what I said, epigenetics, right? And the internal emotions and feelings about that, the two pair up and become in concert with the being or the I should say the biological you that needs to express, and it will start to happen.
So thank you. Thanks so much for explaining so well.
It's the observer effect that changes the particle. Einstein's theory is the observer effect. And when you observe yourself as this complete, whole, unwavering being that is your future self, we'll say one without migraines, what would you do on the other side of your challenge? So we'll say migraines is your condition. That's a very physical condition. It seems to be something that holds us hostage, right? But who would you be without them? How would you act without them? What would your life look like without them? So if you put yourself on the other side of the challenge and live, behave, and act without them, watch the body start to transform genetically to where the causation or the limitation of this migraine condition starts to downregulate, right? Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to take new cutting edge science and start to prove and show ancient truths and technologies.
We're here, we're so passionate about it to bring awareness to people, right? So now they can start able to act based on a new belief, new potentiality through the ancient science and modern science and all those technologies.
100%. And like I said, I believe and I know over the years, over a decade that I've been working in epigenetics, that the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we behave has the biggest influence over that genetic expression and this biological suit. So that's the number one place to start being aware and to shift those systems.